Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here. Welcome to this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, where we answer questions that are featured from the YFP community to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible financial planning team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. So whether you want to optimize your investing plan, pay off student loans, or simply build a solid financial plan, YFP Planning will help you get your income working for you rather than the other way around. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from a member of the YFP Facebook group who asks, is non-PSLF an option for a retail pharmacist? Tim, I think this is a great question. We've been talking a lot about PSLF because of the attention I think it's commanded with the waiver that was issued by the Biden administration. We have not talked as much about non-PSLF for folks that might not work for an eligible or qualifying employer for PSLF. So good question. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I typically like to go through the cadence of PSLF and like what qualifies and how you get into that program. And then we'll basically talk about the non-PSLF program and see some of the differences. So for PSLF, that gets all the press. You have to work for the right type of employer. So that's typically the government or a 501c3 nonprofit. You have to be in the right kind of loans. So this is typically the federal loan, an unsubsidized, direct or, Stafford loan. You have to be in the right repayment plan. So that's typically one of the income driven. So income driven is kind of an umbrella term. They're typically consisted of pay, repay, those types of plans that are out there. IBR, ICR are the other two. You have to make the right amount of payments. So this is typically 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments if you're doing consecutively. They don't have to be consecutive. So you could do 60 payments, work for a for-profit for a year, not get any credit, and then another 60 payments, so really an 11-year timeline in total. Then you have to prove it, which is typically what we talk about with like employment certification and that type of stuff. And I think doing this more regularly is a better option than not. And then you apply and you receive forgiveness, essentially tax-free. So that's basically the cadence of PSLF. Now, if you're like, well, hey, Tim, I work for a retail pharmacy, I work for a for-profit, that's okay. You still are eligible for forgiveness. For forgiveness, it's just a little bit different. So for non-PSLF forgiveness, so put a line through the first one. It doesn't matter who you work for. So you could work for any type of organization. The second one is the same. Like you have to be in the right kind of loan. So you still have to be in one of those, government loans. The third thing is that you have to still be in one of those income-driven plans. The other thing I did mention is that you can be in the standard plan. So the standard plan is the default 10. Now, if you're in PSLF, that doesn't make any sense because the whole program is 10 years. But if you're in standard for the first year and then the last 9, that's the big thing. But for non-PSLF, you can be in standard or one of the income-driven plans. But make the right amount of payments essentially doubles. So instead of it being 120 payments over 10 years or 10 years, it's 240 payments or at least 20 years. Sometimes they go to 25 also. And then you don't necessarily have to prove that you're working for a nonprofit or anything like that. But then at the end of your 20 years that you've been in these, the right loan, the right plan, you apply and you receive taxable forgiveness. So what does that mean? That essentially means that say in the year, so let's say you've been in this program for 5 years, you have 15 more years to go. In 15 years, let's say you're forgiven $100,000. Then in that year, you would basically report your income from your job. So let's say hopefully you make more than 150, but let's just pretend it's 150. You make $150,000 a year, and then you're forgiven $100,000 in loans that year. Then you report to the IRS essentially that you made $250,000, which would have tax implications. So that's where you hear the strategy of, basically saving for the tax bomb. So this is where you are essentially saving for that tax bill that's going to happen, in this example, 15 years in the future, which the best way to do that over a 15-year period is probably some type of taxable account that is invested for the long term, not investment advice. So you might ask, Tim, like, why the heck would I ever do this? The big example or the main example you would do this is one, if you don't have access to a job that's nonprofit, or, you can't, you're not working as a pharmacist for the VA or a nonprofit hospital system or things like that. So you're maybe working in a retail pharmacy. The second deciding factor is your debt to income ratio. So let's say you're a pharmacist that has well beyond $300,000 in loans, and we see them all the time. Let's say you have $350,000 in student loans, and your income is $100,000. Your debt to income ratio is 3.5 to 1. So typically anything that's over 2 to 1. So if you had $210,000 and you made $100,000 and you don't have access to a nonprofit job, that would be another thing that you would want to kick the tires on this. So the idea is that you would, instead of paying a much higher rate to pay off those student loans, you would pay it based on the income driven. So like on 100,000, you're probably paying $600 a month, $700 a month.
Mm-hmm.
But then you would, in your mind, what you would have to do is add whatever I think I'm going to be forgiven in the future, which takes some work, and then discount it back by what you think your investment returns would be. And let's just say you need to save $250 over that 20-year period. Then that your payment in your mind should be $850.
Yeah.
If you think about it that way, which might be much, much less if you're, a standard default plan, Tim, for, an average student loan balance, 170,000 is like $1,900, $1,900, $2,000. I think it's 1,972 if I remember it correctly, at a 6% interest rate.
Not that we see a lot of that.
Yeah. So that compared to 850 is a lot more palatable. And that's at a 10. So you're doing that for 10 years. If you try to accelerate that. And this is another one of those inflection points to go out 20 years. So if you can refinance that $300,000 at a 20-year, which lowers your payment, but the total amount that you would pay over that just doesn't make sense. So when we're assessing this for clients, we're looking at what is the monthly payment and what can you afford? And then what's the total amount? So numbers wise, and that's why PSLF is such a great program. If it's administered correctly, you're typically paying a negative interest rate, meaning you could have 350,000, and especially with all these freezes, you could pay $80,000 in total and then have it forgiven tax-free. So you paid $80,000 on $350,000. Yep. So that's the power behind it. But if you don't have access to that, looking at this, if you meet some of those other requirements is something, but it's a heavier lift because you have to worry about the tax bomb and things like that. I still think, because a lot of people have angst over forgiveness. And we were just talking about this before we turned the mic on. I think you have to, people I think are afraid that they're going to take it away. But if you're 10 years into this 20-year, it's really hard to unwind that, because if you're doing it correctly, Tim, your loans have grown.
You're all in.
Yeah, you're all in because you're trying to pay the least amount in your monthly. So that means that it's not even covering the interest in a lot of ways. So if I start it with 330,000 and I'm doing the 20-year, by the time it gets forgiven, it might be 400,000, 500,000, because I'm trying to pay the least amount total.
Yeah.
So if the government were to say halfway in, hey, psych, just kidding, I think you'd have a mini uprising. So my belief has always been that, and even some of the legislation that they've talked about scrapping forgiveness, which I just think the politics are behind it. You would have to grandfather it in my opinion. So it would be for future borrowers. So borrowers that are, basically taking out loans starting in X amount a year, and then they would apply from there. So yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely something. And again, another soapbox, this is something that is so often overlooked with a lot of financial advisors. One, because they don't understand it. It's more of a newer thing over the last 10 years or so. But if you're getting advice that says oh, don't worry about the loans, they'll figure themselves out, go the other way. And that to me is by and large the default thing. It's because I know about investments, I know about insurance. Those are the things that make me money. The debt doesn't. But it's not hyperbole to say, Tim, and again, I talked about that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that you could pay 80 or 90,000 all the way up to 600, 700,000 over a 5 to 25, 30-year timeline. So the numbers are real. And I think, we've talked about this at length. If you are not super intentional about how to tackle your loans, I think man, I wish I would have done that differently. And I think one of the things that we're talking about, or that we're seeing, is almost an overconfidence in this.
Yes. Yes.
For a longest time, we'd have so many clients that would say, what's the biggest thing keeping up at night? Student loans would be top 3. if not the top one. Now, I don't know if it's because of the freeze or things like this. People are just like, I have $260,000 in loans, but I'm not worried about that. And it's like record scratch. You're not worried about that. And I think it's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. And I think there's a little bit more overconfidence in we know what we're doing. And most of the time, like the vocabulary is there, but the actual process and making sure that it's completely optimized is not. So I would just caution, listeners that there are a lot of nuance to this that really needs to be taken with care.
Yeah. And I think to that point, Tim, we're coming up on the third graduating class right now that has not had to make a student loan payment since the start of the forbearance in March of 2020, right? Class of 2020, class of 2021, class of 2022. And I think that's a part of it. I think the scary thing I see as well, when I talk on student loans or group pharmacists, one of the things I say is after I report the, median debt load is $170,000, I look in the room and there's no emotional reaction. I mean, we just become very numbed over to it. Right. And I did as well in my own journey. And I think the forbearance, certainly while it's had value, of course, in people being able to direct dollars elsewhere and not having to make payments and freeze of interest and all that, I think it has had that impact. But just to re-emphasize what you said, like, this is not a decision to wander into lightly or to sleep through or to say, you know what, I talked with a coworker, they're doing this, so I'm going to do that. It is, and when we talk on this topic, we did a webinar recently with lead planner Kelly Reddy Hefner, where, she said something along the lines of this can be the difference of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think people often hear that and they're like, really? And then we walk through 2 case studies and it's like, really? Like, here are 2 case studies of, if you look at the various options, you dig in, you do the math, and you look at how to optimize these strategies, it's a big time decision. That's exactly why we do a one-on-one service for folks that say, hey, student loans right now are the thing that is plaguing me. We do a one-on-one student loan analysis that really is meant for, let's dive into the student loans and find the best repayment plan for your situation. And that investment of time and money is worth it, period. It's worth it because of all the things we're talking about. And folks can learn more about that if you go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/SLA. So important, though, to put the time into this.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that grinds my gears, I feel like the last couple of recordings, Tim, I've been a little bit cranky on this, so I apologize. But like, I think one of the things that grinds my gears is like, student loans is, it could be still a top thing that needs to be, taken care of, even though there might not be a whole lot of like pain associated, because we think that the freeze will always be there, or just something not to worry about right now. But then it's the prospective client that goes back. It's like, well, I think I'm just going to work with my mom or dad's like financial planner. And I'm like, but like, they don't know, like if they're coming to you about like, oh, do like the snowball method or the avalanche method for student loans, like, or just don't worry about it. It's such a mistake. And, to me, it's like, it is the tail that wags the dog for many of our clients. We have clients that are in all phases of life, from, newly minted grad to retiree. But to me, this is an underserved, and again, like what I saw in the market before I started Script Financial, that is now YFP Planning, is the advice to a lot of the younger pharmacists out there was, don't worry about the loans. They'll figure themselves out. So that's kind of, playing into like what you've been told sometimes in pharmacy school of like, hey, you have this 6-figure income.
Yep.
But think about, if we back up, Tim, if we know that the average is 170 and the standard is almost $2,000 a month, what are salaries for pharmacists? We know that they're leveling off, if not decreasing. Now, again, the market right now is a little bit different, but that's $24,000 a year.
Take home pay $2,000 a month. I mean, you figure a pharmacist price somewhere between 6 and 7. Like, that's a huge percentage of take home pay.
Yes, and to me, the line of demarcation is, for most people, is I want them to be done with the loans in 10 years or less, outside of maybe the non-PSLF option, which makes the most sense. But like, a lot of people will default and they'll just do an income driven plan because that they like that payment. But over the course of that, they're just paying so much more.
Or defer because somebody who took residency 20 years ago said defer.
Right. So like, to me, what the market says is, the financial advisors out there that says, it's like, don't worry about the loans. They'll figure themselves out. Let me sell you an insurance product that you probably don't need. And then let me invest your Roth IRA that is probably not important right now. But those are the 2 methods in which I can make money and help you. And then I'll talk to you every couple of years until you have assets for me to manage.
Yep.
And that's where like we were born essentially. So like to me, it is just being very intentional about this potentially 6-figure decision and where you're going to go with the loans, and then build the plan around that. In essence,
yeah,
that's how important it is, for us. And again, like we talk about student loans all the time, and it is important. But I think like to me, the word is just being intentional around this, which is often a theme of ours.
One last resource I'd mention, we just recorded, I think one of my favorite episodes of the year. We had Robert Lopez, lead planner, Robert Lopez, YFP Planning, talking about PSLF updates and really reinforcing what's come out here in the last year. And then we followed that up with 3 PSLF success stories of folks that combined had over $700,000 of tax-free forgiveness. The emphasis and the genesis of that episode was still consistently hearing folks that, hey, I read this article from 2018, 2019. I talked to so-and-so. I heard this. And really not having confidence in PSLF or the strategy, and really wanting to try to feature more peer pharmacist stories of folks that have gone down that path, and why having some accountability and coaching and expertise in making that decision is so important. So great stuff, Tim. Appreciate the question that came in from a member of the Facebook group on non-PSLF forgiveness. If you have a question that you'd like to have featured on an upcoming episode, 2 ways you can send in that question. Shoot us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record a question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask-YFP. As we wrap up this week's episode, important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided for informational, educational purposes only, is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and in our corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. More information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.